Good afternoon and welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at MarketSite is Perianne. She's the founder and president of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. We also have Paul Atkins, the CEO of Patomak Global Partners and former SEC Commissioner. And we're going to talk about understanding digital tokens. Thank you both for joining me today. MarketSite. Now, the Chamber of Digital Commerce just released a report that outlines comprehensive guidelines for the token ecosystem and ICOs. So, Perianne, if you could kick it off with us, who participated in that and why is it designed specifically for policymakers and practitioners?
So this was one of the biggest projects we've done at the Chamber, and we really enjoyed the process. We launched this initiative called the Token Alliance last year. It's been about a year in the making. We initially launched it based on the huge degree of activity we were seeing around ICOs, and some of that activity was quite concerning to us. So we brought our members together to really address some of the issues. And what we decided as a community to do was to issue principles on how to facilitate responsible issuances of tokens and how to build proper decentralized tokenized networks in a way that's also commensurate with legitimate concerns of investor protections, consumer protections, and others. So we've recruited over 350 participants from around the world to put these principles together. It includes many people operating in the blockchain space, companies who have an expertise in tokens. We have over 20 law firms that participated in the process. And we also worked with former regulators like Paul and also Jim Newsom, who's the former chairman of the CFTC. So the whole process was really meant to be to address responsible governance and bringing both the industry and regulators and the policy community together to do so in a way that can benefit the community as a whole.
All right, and Paul, what are some of the biggest issues that the industry is facing and why?
Well, the biggest ones, Perianne kind of alluded to them, is the regulatory uncertainty in the United States in particular, and that's because of the nature of tokens and how they're issued, how they're sold, how they're marketed. So they can touch on the jurisdiction of several different regulators, but primarily the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then to other extent state and other federal like banking regulators and things like that. And also the IRS, the good old IRS, we can't forget about that.
Yeah.
Right.
So what we have been trying to do is to lay out guidelines for participants in the marketplace as to what it means to be regulated by the CFTC as a commodity or a security under the rules and regulations of the SEC. And then if they want to try to be neither and to try to have a true, what we're calling a utility token, meaning it's like a ticket for entry into a particular ecosystem that's not an investment contract, not tied to hoping that you're going to make profit off of that token. So, and then we're hoping also to have this guidance be helpful to regulators and to really spark a discussion that the private sector is leading.
All right, and Perianne, I mean, clearly it's not as mature as the equity markets, for example. So where are we right now in terms of regulation and security law as it stands?
Well, as Paul mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty, and really the biggest question that we've been grappling with, we know our members do as well, is when can you tell a token is not a security? So we do know the SEC has issued guidance that a token can be a security. Great.
Right.
But if you think about the inverse, when can does that also mean that a token cannot be a security, meaning it would not be subjected to the same laws at the SEC? That is where the uncertainty, that question's not clearly defined. So what the report does is it lays out a framework for a token project to operate outside of the traditional securities laws frameworks, but it gives us a new governance model for utility tokens. Not that it's a free-for-all, not that they're completely unregulated, but bringing the community together to agree on guiding principles. So we can build a governance framework that's appropriate for this new operating model in the 21st century.
What's an example of a guideline for a utility token?
Well, so for example, if, as I mentioned before, if it's not tied to an investment or an expectation of profit. So for example, it's a ticket for entry into, say, an ecosystem where you might have banking services and other things to be provided to members of the group, and they exhibit their membership through ownership of a token. And so the token itself is not a particular way of raising money to try to build that particular system.
So the guidelines cover token sponsors and token trading platforms. So we talk about the do's and don'ts if you're going to be a token sponsor, and then appropriate principles for the trading platforms themselves. So that's the scope of the report.
So it sounds like it's still a little bit arbitrary at this point as the guidelines and principles are being formulated so that you can establish a governance system. What's the token economic landscape right now, and what does the future look like? Are we in the very early stages of this?
Well, blockchain technology in general is still in very embryonic stages. It's a very nascent technology. It's less than 10 years old. ICOs, or initial coin offerings, token offerings, is a trend within the blockchain industry that really took off just in 2017. The mass majority of ICO-related activity happened over the past 12 to 24 months. Of that, you've seen kind of a number of different countries getting involved. The majority of funding activity is happening in the Caribbean by a long shot. There's a lot of money from the Caribbean that's investing in foreign projects or token projects outside of the Caribbean. The inverse is true in the United States, where the majority of investment funds are invested in US-based projects.
Right.
But the reason why is because of the regulatory uncertainty in the United States. Oftentimes these token projects around the world, they cut out people in the United States because the regulatory landscape is not clear and it's not worth some type of enforcement action or a violation of the law. So while we are in early stages, there is a significant amount of activity underway, and we do see this as a very promising new way of digital commerce.
Right, so it sounds like the technology side is moving along, but Paul, let me ask you this to wrap up. How challenging is it going to be for regulators and exchanges to come together and create law around this?
Well, so what we've set out are some general principles, and all of this is principle-based, and it depends on the facts and circumstances. But there's so many examples in the past of the private sector working with the regulators. For example, like international issuances of securities by U.S. firms. So issuing, say, euro-dollar transactions, euro-dollar securities abroad. So all of that was developed by private sector law firms in conjunction with the SEC and coming up with a procedure that ultimately the SEC codified and put into what's called Reg S.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is do pretty much the same thing, is to get a coalescence of ideas around general principles, and then for a private sector through law firms and others to be able to apply those principles to particular fact situations. So we're at a nascent stage. That's just the nature of the technology. But I think that helping to give people some sort of guide rails and some sort of idea as to what they should be focused on ultimately to stay out of trouble, because there are bad things going on out there in the marketplace, but our goal is to help people do the right thing, help this technology build, because it's a huge innovation and a potential a boon to the economy.
Yeah, the members of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, they want to be compliant, they want to be law-abiding, they want to do the right thing, and so our platform is helping bring the industry and government together to facilitate a dialogue to be able to do so. So we're very optimistic. We've had many conversations with many different regulators around the world. They put a lot of input into this process as well. The guidelines were taken with input from the policy community, and we believe this is the right thing to do, and we're excited about what will come of this.
And I will tell you, out of all the blockchain and crypto coverage that I do, whether it's at MarketSite or the different conferences that are around the world, that seems to be the key theme as well, that they want to get the regulation done right. And move forward with the technology. Well, thank you both for joining us at MarketSite. And thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.